Hello. Not a doctor, not a psychologist, not a trauma specialist. I'm a former diplomat, so you may wonder what am I doing here? But I've been asked to sort of share some of my perspective after 29 years in the Department of State, serving in 7 foreign countries, under 6 presidents, 13 secretaries of state. And violence was a reality. You may think a diplomat is out having tea and crumpets somewhere, living in a nice mansion, and living the life. Well, it's not always like that. Violence is a reality, and if you walk into the State Department, 2201 C Street, in the C Street entrance, you will see a wall, a plaque, that has all the Foreign Service officers who have died in the line of duty. Since the beginning, since Benjamin Franklin was a representative in Paris. And in the early years, you will see the causes of cholera in Havana, or drowning trying to save somebody in North Africa or something. And today, the causes are different. It's killed by terrorists, died in bombing attack, etc. So the world has changed quite a bit. I would argue violence was a lot more predictable back when I started in 1977. The world was different. It was the Cold War. It was the Soviets versus us. Soviet missiles pointed at American cities. You knew who the enemy was. Today, the enemy could be anybody. So it's a different world, and we haven't caught up to adapt to it as well as we could. In the 1990s, our embassies in Tanzania and Kenya were bombed, killing countless American diplomats and Foreign Service nationals who helped us in our task. Recently, you saw the case of Chris Stevens, our ambassador to Libya, who was out visiting one of his constituent posts, Benghazi, sorry, when he was caught up in what was a terrorist attack and killed. And his security force could not save him. The countless American troops that are in the Middle East could not be deployed in time to save him. So these are the realities. You never know in what you're getting into, what situations. So intelligence is key. Knowing where you're going in order to prevent violence. One of the things we have not dealt with as well, because we now have diplomats serving in places like Iraq, Afghanistan, Pakistan, places where violence is commonplace. We have not done enough to look at PTSD for our diplomats. The military does a great job in teaching people our PTSD, coming up with methods of treatment, etc. We're only starting to do that with our diplomats, because you don't think of diplomats as being exposed to violence, but they are. More diplomats have been killed in the line of duty than Army generals, for example. So, violence today is very unpredictable. In my personal experience, for example, early in my career, I served in Haiti. Haiti is a country of which the best history written is called Written in Blood. So that tells you the violence. Is a country that came into being in 1804 when the slaves of Haiti revolted against their French masters and kicked them out in what was an amazing military triumph, because Napoleon sent some of his best troops in 1804, but they were not able to suppress the slave rebellion, and Haiti became an independent country in 1804. But the rest of the world turned their back on Haiti. Haiti was not recognized by the United States for 58 years, until 1862, after the Emancipation Proclamation. So a culture of violence has always been present in the history of Haiti. And But when I started in Haiti, which was in the 1980s, it was different because the only violence that we feared was violence from the state to its citizens. When you had dictators who had death squads, who had intimidation goons who would harass their citizens. So, I had to visit dissidents in their homes and always followed by these nefarious characters, but he knew exactly more or less what you were getting into and what methods to apply. Today, it's a lot different. I think Arturo talked about citizen insecurity. Citizen insecurity is the biggest problem in Latin America today. San Pedro Sula, the second city of Honduras, is the murder capital of the world. The violence levels in Central America are way above anything else in any other part of the world. Part of it is arms are a problem. Mr. Cervantes was saying there were civil wars fought in Central America in the 1980s where AK-47s not only brought in from outside sources, Cuba, Soviet Union, the United States, and after the peace was achieved in the late 1980s, 1990s, these arms were still there. So if you travel in the countryside in many of these countries, you took your life in your own hands. And there is still a lot of violence in these countries, now exacerbated not only by the drug traffickers, who, whenever we fight drug traffickers, you have to count on the balloon theory. If you squeeze them here, they'll pop out somewhere else. I served in the Bahamas in the 1990s when 75% of the cocaine coming to the US is coming through the Bahamas, a place which is ideal, 700 little islands. We can make an airdrop, bring a fast boat in from Florida, and in the days of GPS, it's pretty easy to do. Well, we tried to help the Bahamas fight this by bringing in balloons, bringing in Coast Guard helicopters, DEA agents, and sure enough, we pretty much stopped the traffic of cocaine from the Bahamas, but they moved over to the Mexican border. As the Mexican authorities and the US authorities tried to squeeze there, now the route is through Central America. So it is a very difficult battle to fight. And we have to be aware of it because, a lot of countries say, well, that's not our problem. Drugs are not our problem. You are the problem. It's US demand that drives the problem. If the US didn't smoke pot or crack or inhale cocaine, there wouldn't be a problem. Well, it's not so easy. I mean, the US is part of the problem. We have recognized it. We have to do better in our treatment. But as the Bahamians learned, for example, when a Bahamian policeman makes $8,000 a year and you pay him $10,000 to fall asleep one night, how many people would be able to stand up to that in a very poor country? And that's how the traffickers get people to cooperate. So corruption is a result of drug trafficking in transit countries. And sometimes the traffickers pay their associates in bales of cocaine or bales of heroin. So you have consumption then start to rise in these countries who think they're immune from the problem, but they're not. So counter-narcotics are a problem. Mr. Cervantes referred to the problem of arms in Mexico. It is true, a lot of the violence, a lot of arms come through the Mexican-Texas border. It's very hard in a country that has a Second Amendment, the right to bear arms, to say, you cannot export arms or to control the flow of arms. If we were a dictatorship, it'd be a lot easier. And we have been trying, the United States has been trying to keep better control on these arms and how they flow to other countries, but it's a very difficult task. How do you fight it with diplomacy? Well, police training, education. We support NGOs that do help a lot of the victims We support human rights education. And I think by supporting democracy, if you have a democracy with strong institutions, with a reliable judicial sector where citizens can go to and expect fair treatment, if you can fight corruption, if you can remove officials who can be bribed or who are there to enrich themselves, that goes a long way toward fighting the problem. One of the results of the Central American wars in the 1980s was that a lot of mines were placed in many places. So the United States has engaged in a number of demining efforts through the Organization of American States to try to educate people who are in the countryside about where the mines may be and what to do in case they encounter one, etc. So there are many things that can be done. Education, police training, and there are a lot of consequences. Immigration has been one in Central America now. This latest immigration crisis, for example, in Central America was very different because usually the typical immigrant was one who crossed the Mexican border, risked their lives in the Arizona desert for days under terrible conditions, and finally found a way to make it to Los Angeles, Houston, Dallas, New York, etc. This crisis is different. Many of the immigrants just show up in El Paso, Texas, and other places, and they're children. And it's the parents who are sending the children. And part of it is that we have a law where we cannot keep children in the same detention facilities as the adult population. So the children are often released to a relative who takes care of them. And then they get a court date, which may be as long as a year or two in the future. So this has been a crisis that has been, I think, driven a lot by the violence in Central America, but also driven by our own laws and regulations. So these are consequences of violence as well. So I would just say that diplomacy can be a tool. We do have programs to help countries in the Caribbean, Central America, Mexico with Plan Merida. They're not all about training police or lethal methods or anything like that. But it's about transparency, about education, about better tactics, etc. So I'm sure I didn't answer all your questions, so I'd be happy to take up any other topic you'd like to take up when the time comes for Q's and A's. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. And we will have a half an hour of time for questions and discussion on further issues of diplomacy. And please help me welcome Barthélemy Bazimo from the Africa Faith and Justice Network, who will speak to us about religion, faith, and violence, an African perspective.